And again, once again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our dear participants coming from all over the country, besides Mindanao, and even the whole world. So I'll be your host for this morning's activity and webinar, Raymond Cabrera. So we thank you for taking time to join us in this webinar, which is titled the FDC Forest Policy ETalks, Watershed Management Webinar Series, Enhancing and Sustaining Stakeholders' Participation in Watershed Management. So presently, we have 176 participants joining us via Zoom, and those joining us from Facebook Live through our FDC Facebook page, we have 55 participants. So we're still waiting for others to join us via the Zoom, or if you cannot join us via Zoom, you can go to the Facebook page of FDC, which is UPLB Forestry Development Center. Just search us, and then you'll be able to join us via that platform. Okay, so before we formally start our program, let's have a short icebreaker first. So in this case, to our Facebook page, nanonood po ng Facebook, sa Facebook natin, and our attendees here, I want you to, I'm going to engage you to, again, flash na po yung ating Mentimeter. Yan. So, yung QR code po natin, paki-scan lang or go to menti.com and input this number, 59668866. So, meron lang po ang question na ibibigay sa inyo. After that, malalaman, ipapakita po natin sa screen kung ano yung mga kasagutan po sa question nyo. Or, for those joining us via the Zoom platform, we have posted the link on the chat box. So, pwede nyo po yan i-click and i-redirect po kayo dyan diretso. Yan. So, again, menti.com, input 59668866. Or scan this QR code, cellphone nyo po. Diretso po kayong i-redirect dyan. Okay. So, let us wait. Can we share the Menti so we can see if how many have actually participated already or inside? Yan. So, ang question po natin is, give us one stakeholder in implementing watershed management. So far, ayan po ang mga sagot nyo. So we have LGUs, we have community members, yan, government daw, people's organizations, yes. Mga indigenous people natin, IP, yan. PSR, NGAs, the community, yan. Padami po ng padami ang mga sumasagot po sa atin. Yan, we have 30. So far, 32 na. So try ko pong basahin. Nasabi ko na po ay, yan, private sector, yes. And then water districts, yes. NGOs or civic, mga CSOs natin. And then forest community and farmers, yes. Ayan, so marami pong mga nasagot. May nagsagot UPLB, yes. Partner niyo po ang UPLB din sa watershed management. River councils, even informal settlers, yan, may nagsagot po. What else? Forest occupants, yes, part na po sila ng forest community natin. Private institutions, yes. Educational stakeholders, yes, coming from the academe. Upland dwellers, yan, kasama rin po talaga sila. And yan, we're still getting answers. So far, we have 59 po na nagjo-join sa atin via the Menti. Yan, mga sagot po nila. May sagot po DOST, yes. IPs, yes. Private companies, yes. Stakeholders din po sila dyan. So far, 63 na po. Ayan. So, salamat po sa inyong pagsagot sa aming munting katanungan. Thank you for participating. So, mga next time po, mas marami po sana. So, anyway, so to start, let me give you the overview of the program. Very, very fast. Yan. So, for today's webinar, this will be the program flow. So, we'll have three speakers talking about different topics. Okay. So, formally start to usher in today. Let me call on to the Associate Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB, to give us the opening remarks, none other than Dr. Analyn Codilan. Yes, Mama Ana?
Yes, thank you, Raymond. To our DNR Assistant Secretary, Marcial Amaro Jr., Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz, Forester Anselmo P. Cabrera, Dean Marlo Mendoza, and of course, FDC Director Priscila Dolom, and to our online participants, a pleasant good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth Watershed Management Webinar Series, which is jointly organized by FDC and the Forestland Management Program of the Forest Management Bureau in support of FMB's Save Our Watershed campaign. This series of seminar aims to enhance the knowledge and understanding of various stakeholders by promoting and encouraging best practices in watershed management. The previous three webinars dealt with the topics on valuation of watershed ecosystem services, key features and functions of watersheds and its current status, and sustainable watershed management. For today, the theme is all about the enhancing and sustaining the participation of stakeholders in watershed management. Stakeholders in general perceive that their partnerships have been most effective at addressing local problems. The government agencies, specifically the DENR, are eager to work with partners to help restore and protect the watersheds. The DENR recognizes the active involvement of the concerned people, private organizations, institutions, and other stakeholders in sustaining various ecosystem functions and providing numerous benefits to communities. Protecting the integrity of watersheds is a primary concern. I enjoin you to listen and participate later in the discussion as our speakers talk on the lessons learned with the involvement of stakeholders in watershed management, the role, guiding principles, and needs of the Watershed Management Council, and lastly, the experience of the Forestland Management Program under the Forest Management Bureau on strengthening the Watershed Management Council. I hope this webinar will encourage us to participate, support, and be involved in the various programs, projects, and practices to save our watersheds. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very warm message, Dr. Ana. And to give the opening remarks, may I call on Forester Marcial C. Amaro Jr., CESO 3, the DNR Assistant Secretary for Policy Planning and Foreign Assisted and Special Projects, and concurrently the Director of the Forest Management Bureau. Sir Marcial, ASEC.
Thank you, Raymond. Good morning to everyone who are with us in this webinar. To those who are connected through Zoom or watching through Facebook Live. I am grateful that given the current situation, we still have this means to communicate and exchange views on matters which we considered close to our heart, such as taking care of our watersheds. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the key persons who would be with us today and sharing very good experiences and new knowledge in terms of the enhancement of watershed management by way of engaging actively stakeholders in these areas. So we have, of course, the Director of the Forestry Development Center, Dr. Priscila Dolom, our distinguished guest speakers, our former UPLB Chancellor and NAST Academician, Dr. Rex Victor Cruz, the Dean of UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Professor Marlo Mendoza, and our very own institutional development specialist of the Forestland Management Project, Forester Anselmo Cabrera. As mentioned, this is already the fourth session of the webinar series, Forest Policy ETalks, Watershed Management Webinar Series, in partnership with the Forestry Development Center and the Forestland Management Project, or FMB, in line with our Save Our Watershed campaign, SOW. To those who were fortunate and who were with us since the first session, I would like to thank you for your loyalty and patronage, especially those who really contributed very nice ideas based on the subject or the topics from the previous sessions. I again pose this challenge to you to again provide for this active engagement and, of course, for the application of the things you have learned from the three sessions, including that of today. For those who are just joining us for the first time, let me, on behalf of my organization, the Forest Management Bureau, and the project which the Bureau is implementing, Forestland Management Project, let me provide you how the Save Our Watershed came about. This is a campaign launched by no less than our secretary on June 30, 2021, which aims to promote collaborative initiatives for the conservation and sustainable management of watersheds. The campaign is part of the many components of the projects of Forestland Management Project, which is benefiting from a 10-year loan assistance from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. For the project, the campaign intends to involve wider participation of stakeholders to sustain the initiatives the project carried out in the sites, particularly in the Upper Pampanga and Halao River basins. Also, this serves as a platform for forging or strengthening partnerships within the water and among the watershed stakeholders, such as where we have this contest early on or icebreaker, particularly people's organization, local government units, watershed management councils, and many more. I guess we will have more or less an attempt to have an exhaustive listing after the presentations today. At the national scale, the Save Our Watershed campaign intends to draw a policy for sustainable integrated watershed management. I am glad to share this update that the draft executive order, which was promised during the been finalized and subject to the approval of the DNR officials before finally having this draft endorsed to the Office of the President for His Excellency's consideration and approval. You definitely would expect in this session the further appreciation of the various roles and importance of the watersheds, including those that are dependent on the watersheds, whether direct or indirect, as stakeholders. As we go through this subject, the topic on enhancing and sustaining stakeholders' participation in watershed management. Finally, I would like to invite everyone to visit, follow, and like the social media accounts of the Save Our Watershed campaign on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for you to be kept posted on our future activities. I am hoping that this activity, just like the previous one, would be successful. But let me end by sharing and perhaps informing the newcomers of the Save Our Watershed campaign's main message. Saving watersheds is saving lives. Thank you, and be safe, everyone.
Thank you, ASEC Amaro, for giving us a brief overview of this project and this campaign, which is Saving Our Watersheds. So, very admirable po yung ating project na yan. So, for the next part of our program, let me call on my colleague, Forester Judith F. Castillo, a University Research Associate of the Forestry Development Center, to formally introduce to us the speakers for today's forum. She will also be the moderator for our open forum. Yes, Forester Judith.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar will have 3 speakers. First, to deliver the topic on the participation of stakeholders in watershed management, lessons in selected watershed, we have Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz. Dr. Cruz is a retired professor at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, College of Forestry and Natural Resources. He obtained his bachelor and master's degrees in forestry at UPLB and his doctoral degree in watershed management at the University of Arizona, USA. Dr. Cruz is well known in the area of watershed management since majority of his works focus on watersheds. In the past, Dr. Cruz served as FDC Director, CFNR Dean, and UPLB Chancellor. Currently, he serves as member of the People's Survival Fund Board. Also, he is one of the authors of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th IPCC assessment reports. In recognition of his exemplary contribution to science and technology, he became a member of the National Academy of Science and Technology in 2019. Our next speaker, Dean Marlo D. Mendoza, will be presenting the topic on Watershed Management Council, Rationale, Guiding Principles and Needs. Dean Mendoza is the current Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB. He is an Associate Professor at the Department of Social Forestry and Governance at CFNR, UPLB. His career spans over 30 years with engagements in the private sector, the academe, nonprofit organizations, and the government bureaucracy. He served the CFNR as faculty member in 2007 and later was appointed Associate Dean. Prof. Mendoza served the Department of Environment and Natural Resources on various secondment capacities as FMB Director, Regional Director, Assistant Secretary, and Undersecretary. He was involved in forest restoration projects in the UP Sierra Madre Land Grants and in Caranglan, Nueva Ecija with the Tan Yankee Foundation and served as country director for the Philippines and the US-based Blacksmith Institute, undertaking site assessments and remediation plan preparation of toxic hotspots. Professor Mendoza has co-authored several journal articles and technical publications. Lastly, to share the FMP's experience in strengthening governance of the watershed through the Watershed Management Council, we have Forester Anselmo P. Cabrera. Forester Cabrera is currently the Institutional Development Specialist and Technical Assistance Team Leader of the DENR JICA Forestland Management Project. He is a graduate of BS Forestry at UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources. He has more than 20 years experience on CBFM, environmental governance, land use planning, and ENRM. Mr. Cabrera also worked with various international donor agencies like the World Bank, GIZ, USAID, and JICA. He also became a conservation finance team leader in the USAID's Be Wiser project. Thank you very much. And now we are giving the floor to our speakers, starting with Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz.
Thank you very much, Judith. And once again, I'd like to greet everyone a blessed morning. And I hope that as you have profited from the previous sessions, you will do so as well, in this particular installment of this webinar series. And of course, I greet Assistant Secretary Amaro, also the concurrent director of FMB, and also our Dean Marlo Mendoza, Director Dolom, and the entire staff of FDC, and of course our participants from the DNR, local government units, and other sectors. Welcome, and thank you for joining this webinar series. Now let me first share my screen so that we can begin our all right. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen now. All right, so my topic is about participation of stakeholders in watershed management, lessons in selected watersheds. Actually, most of the lessons will just be taken from one case study, one of my recent projects, and that will be on the Manila Bay Master Plan development. Okay, so just take a quick look back. In the first session on valuation of ecosystem services of watershed, you heard the discussion on this, and I remember Dr. Codilan, our associate dean, at the presentation on this topic. And then on the second session and third session, I had the opportunity of being part of this installments. The second session on the basics on the concepts of watershed, and then third session is all about watershed management 101. Now, some of the key learnings that I hope you took away, from those sessions. One, watershed contributes to socioeconomic development and environmental protection. So the contribution of watersheds to our country is real. They can be quantified, and one way to quantify them is by putting values, whether on goods and services that are that can be transacted in a formal market, or whether they can be valued in some other ways. But the contribution is real to socioeconomic development and environmental protection. And watershed is an encompassing landscape, and I hope you are already aware of this, and it's part already of your consciousness that when we talk about watershed, it is talking about all the land area from the ridge all the way to the coastal area, and not merely looking at watersheds as those located in our forest lands. Okay, and then third is that watershed management is about science-based use of land and other watershed resources. That's our main concern in watershed management. How do we ensure that the use of land and watershed resources happen in a way that contributes to the overall sustainability of the watershed to deliver the goods and services, of the different ecosystems that are found inside watershed landscapes. So I hope, that for this session, the objective of which is to revisit the importance of stakeholder engagement in watershed management and what it takes to have a profitable stakeholder engagement, will also be worthwhile, for all of us. And the outline of my presentation will be that, we will talk about the importance of stakeholder engagement in watershed management, identification of stakeholders, and then closing our discussion with good practices and on stakeholder engagement, in various activities. Okay, so the first question is, why engage stakeholders in watershed management? Why do we need them? Well, let's look at a watershed, and see the watershed as it is. That watershed has multiple uses, has multiple ecosystems delivering various goods and services that we said in the beginning, are vital to socioeconomic development and environmental environmental protection. And just for that reason, we need to engage people who are not only beneficiaries of these resources and ecosystem services and goods, but at the same time also in whose hands are the sustainability of these goods and services are actually depending on, so that we can sustain them. So we need stakeholders in that respect. Now, another thing is that we have to realize that in the watershed, the human and the natural problems, or anthropogenic and natural problems, are interconnected. We cannot separate people's problems from the problem of nature. Okay, and hence, if we want to if we want to actually be true, be true to that goal, of addressing human and natural problems concurrently and effectively, then we have to engage the stakeholders. And then third, we have to realize that in a watershed, we have these different problems. I think this is just a substantiation of my previous slide, that in a watershed, we have these different concerns. We have encroachment, we have biodiversity loss, we have forest degradation, forest fragmentation, forest cover loss to deal with, okay? And you can see right there, just in the forest part of the watershed, we do have problems related to people, and we have problems related to the natural systems. And then we have problems of land conversion, soil degradation, diminishing land productivity, and these are all human problems, that is not only confined to the forest, but also to lands devoted for agriculture. And then we do have problems in our urban areas, such as congestion, occupation of easements and waterways, pollution, informal settlements, greenhouse gas emissions, frequent flooding, etc., etc. Those are mostly human problems that can be aggravated, or that can be regulated or minimized by solving our problems with nature. And then we do have, as well, problems with our mangrove and coastal and marine ecosystems. That includes water pollution. We do have coastal flooding, sea level rise, and all those. These are mixture of human and natural problems that we can solve, that we can solve together and within a landscape framework. And we do have problems also with our lakes and wetlands, with our grasslands and with our rivers, okay? Now, we also have to realize, that we have this, we have this in our watersheds. We have many national government agencies with one mandate, or another. Okay, they have different kinds of mandates that are related, or that has implication on the watershed. We have DNR, we have local government units, we have NCIP, DA, NIA, MMDA, and so on. And this is in particular reference to Manila Bay Basin. Okay. We have HLURB, DILG, BFAR, okay, etc., etc. So we have many government agencies, and because of that, we do have a lot of programs within a watershed, and we need to harmonize and synergize them, minimize conflicts, and promote complementation and promote synergism, so that we can increase or enhance or maximize rather the use of the resources that are allocated for these different programs. And then what are then how then are we going to proceed with stakeholder engagement? One of the very first important step is identifying key stakeholders. Okay, if we fail in this, then we are consigning ourselves to ineffectiveness, in terms of engaging our stakeholders. So while we advocate for active participation of stakeholders, we make sure that we identify, the key stakeholders, the right stakeholders, that we must engage. Okay, because it's not merely filling up, the exercise of watershed management with many people, but also, it's an issue of making sure that we, that we have the right stakeholders with us. So what are the basis for identifying stakeholders? One is the spatial coverage. It makes sense, okay? So when we talk about where the watershed is and what area, what LGUs, what political units it's encompassing, then we have to consider this as basis for identifying stakeholders. We call them the on-site stakeholders, but just a while ago we heard from ASEC Mars, that we also have off-site stakeholders. These are stakeholders outside the boundary of our watershed, and yet they are also important and they have influence on what is happening in the watershed. So we take consideration of both, okay, based on the spatial coverage of our watershed. Then second, we look at the resource uses. What are the resources in the watershed and what are the major uses of those resources in the watershed? And on that basis, we recognize who are the relevant stakeholders to these different uses of resources in the watershed. And hence from there, we can identify DNR, of course, who are concerned with practically everything from the forest, the water to soil, etc., etc. And then we also talk about NAMRIA or LLDA, for instance, that are concerned with lakes and wetlands, okay? And NEDA, of course, with the overall framework of development, okay, which is very much a part of watershed management. So based on the resource uses, then we identify the different stakeholders, okay? For Metro Manila, for the Manila Basin, for instance, which is what I have shown you in the two previous slides, the whole basin actually encompass the Pampanga River Basin and the Laguna Lake Basin and the smaller watersheds of Bataan and Cavite. Okay. Now, in these areas, we do have different uses of the watersheds, and hence we identify different stakeholders, as you can see on your screen. There's a whole lot, of these stakeholders that we engage in, and you can just imagine how intensive and extensive our stakeholder engagement activities were, which I'm going to tell something about, which I'm going to share with you, in the later slides. Okay, and then we recognize, that these are the uses. For instance, in Manila Bay, these are the major uses that we are talking about. Okay, and that has relation to the uses of watersheds in the catchment areas or in the terrestrial part of the Manila Bay Basin area. And then okay, I'll skip that. And then an important basis also of identifying key stakeholders are problems and issues, issues and concerns that we're trying to grapple with. If we're trying to grapple with solid waste or with people exposed to flooding or area of natural habitat degradation, or if we're concerned, for instance, with pollution of water or reduction in fish stock biomass, then we have to engage the right people who are directly concerned with these different problems, whether they are from the government or from the private or local community stakeholder groups. Okay, and then we have to look at the vision and the goals. Okay, for Manila Bay, we from the very beginning, we have visions and goals in mind, and this is actually what we have in mind. Okay, and then we, based on this vision and goals, we identified who are the stakeholders that will have their proper contribution and the proper perspectives, in relation to this vision and goals that we have for Manila Bay. And guess what? While we have this from the beginning, we have to tweak this a little bit, when we started engaging the stakeholders, because then, they have their own ideas, and we of course acceded to those that are valid and relevant. And then we also look at another important aspect of stakeholder engagement, and that is, what are some of the good practices. This is now my sharing, This is now my sharing of what good practices, we can actually take upon our own or each engagement in our in the management of our own watershed areas, whether they are in our backyards or in another place. Okay, so let me begin, with this good practice. You engage the stakeholders from planning to implementation. Okay, so you cannot engage stakeholders, just from the orientation stage or just from the visioning or targeting stage. You have to engage them, from the very beginning of watershed management and from the very beginning of planning all the way to its implementation and the monitoring and evaluation. Okay. In other words, stakeholder engagement should not end. Okay. It has, it should be continuous. Okay. And should be prominent in all phases of all watershed management. Okay, they have to be there. They have to be a permanent fixture in watershed management. And then you have to consider essential practices, in stakeholder engagement. So what am I referring to? One is reaching out to stakeholders. Okay, you cannot just wait for them to come to you. There will be stakeholders who will come at your doorstep and knock, and say, can you include us, okay, in what you're doing? But there will be a lot of key stakeholders, that will need some prodding, persuasion, convincing, motivating, okay, to reaching out for them to participate. Okay, for you to ignore them and say, well, forget about you. If you don't want to get involved, then you don't get involved. Okay, you cannot have that kind of a mindset. Okay, once you have identified your key stakeholders, commit to reaching out to them. Okay, and not dispense them with, if they are disinterested, it will be your task to make them interested. I remember when we were doing the Bicol River Basin Watershed Project, way back in the early 2000s. We in our proposal, in our project documents, we have allotted 1 month to mobilize the stakeholders. But you know what? We went into, we went as deep as 6 months and beyond, and we still haven't gotten all the stakeholders that we needed to be engaged. Okay, and we spent so much, and that even the project management were worried, that we're spending too much in reaching out to stakeholders. But, I convinced them that if we cannot get these stakeholders to be with us, forget about the whole project's success in implementation of this once we are done. Okay. And so we reach out to the stakeholders in different ways. We go to the TV, to radio. We send people on the ground, We had meetings here and there, all right? Until we finally said, yeah, we have everybody that we needed to be involved. So that is going to be very important. And then scoping the needs, aspirations, and priorities. Remember, the main reason why we try to engage them is to make sure that we know exactly what they feel, what they aspire for, what their priorities are, what their preferences are, because we will try to put them together in harmony with those of others, so that at the end, we can have we can have really something that amalgamates, all of this. Not necessarily able to, do not aspire, to please everyone, because you're not going to be able to do that. That's the reality, but you do as much as you can. Okay. And in cases where you displease certain stakeholder groups, you have to be very creative to assure them, that their concerns are still going to be protected, And then third, seeking their opinions and suggestions as basis of the master plan. Okay, in the Manila Bay master planning process that we did, we had to seek their opinions. We had to go back to each agency, many times, because we cannot understand what they want. We cannot understand, what where they want to contribute in the whole management of the Manila Bay Basin area, But we have to make sure, okay, that exactly what's on their mind, that we actually get to them, and be able to capture them, and hopefully we can merge them into the master plan that we were doing, so that at the end of the day, the master plan becomes a reflection, reflection of their minds and reflection of their hearts. Okay, and then harmonizing diverse interests, focusing on common interests, and respecting divergent interests. Again, as I said, you will be dealing with a lot of people with different priorities and different interests. Okay, but make sure that you don't get lost in all of this. You know, be focused on the overall. Okay, on the overall goal that you have. You know, and then don't get lost in the details of the interest. It's important for you to know this individual interests of stakeholders. But again, you know, that your challenge will be, you know, how to put them together, identify where they are intersecting in their interest, and then focus on that. Do not focus on those where you are differing. Focus on the interests where you are converging, you know, and capitalize on that as the rallying point. Okay. And then harmonizing master plan with other local national development plans affecting Manila Bay. Here, when you are trying to manage a watershed or developing a plan for your watershed management, you cannot do it in isolation of what others are trying to do. In fact, before you probably begin managing a watershed, there are already many sectors, agencies, and the groups that have started doing something, or has, you know, or have a plan of sort, you know, that is relevant to certain parts of the watershed. And hence, you know, when all of these are already existing, what you need to do is to make sure that you are, you know, keeping them in mind, you know, and keeping them within your perspective, so that when you are doing your watershed management programs or plans, you know, you make sure that these are connected or in harmony, or in some way, you know, trying to build the bridge, you know, between your management plan and what the others are actually already doing in your watershed. Now, it will be a mistake to assume that everything else that is taking place in the watershed is wrong, you know, and that you are there to make things right. That will be a big, you know, a big error in trying to approach the situation that is already existing on the ground. And then transparent sharing of data and information and decision making. Transparency is paramount in stakeholder engagement. Now, you cannot possibly gain their trust, and gaining their trust is the foundation of effective stakeholder engagement. You lose their trust from the very beginning by being, you know, by lack of transparency, then you lose them forever and difficult to get them back again. Okay, so right from the beginning, be transparent with everything, with information, with data, you know, and with how decisions are going to be made, and, you know, where in this scheme of decision making they will be engaged. Okay, that there will be nothing, you know, that will be hidden from them, and that there won't be any, you know, silent decision making group, you know, that will make unilateral decisions about what needed to be done. Okay, and then you need to encourage stakeholder inputs in the design of projects, implementing arrangements, and monitoring and evaluation. Do not wait for them again, you know, to come to you. You have to provoke them. You know, you have to provoke them to contribute, you know, especially in designing programs and projects in your watershed. There will be groups or stakeholders that will be upfront, you know, that will be aggressively coming to you, you know, and making all the suggestion, and that should be much welcome. Okay, but there will be stakeholders again, just like before, as I said, you know, they will be silent, but nonetheless, you know, don't think that they are not, you know, that their inputs are not important. Okay, their silence doesn't mean that they cannot contribute anything, but it's just that perhaps they feel that they're not empowered to do so. And so what you need to do is to provide them the enabling conditions, the right conditions that will make them secure, you know, that will make them convinced, you know, that it's worthwhile for them to engage and contribute their inputs to the design of watershed programs. And then determining appropriate engagement tools, you know, whether it's FGDs, small group discussions, consultation workshops, surveys, polls, KIIs. Now, these are all, these are all something that you know already, but you cannot choose which tool, okay, on the basis of what is convenient to you. Okay, I realized this in the Manila Bay project. We had many different stakeholders to reach out to, and we said, oh, let's cluster them, and put them together, because if we do them individually, we're not gonna be able to complete this project on time. Okay, but towards the middle, we realized, no, we cannot do that. We have to actually reach out to them individually if needed. There are stakeholders, who can be gathered together just fine. Okay, but there will be stakeholders whom you need to engage, whom you need to reach out to individually. Okay, and you have to realize that there are such stakeholders that will need your special care and attention. So another good practice is to promote ownership. This is basically what you want to do, right? You want to make sure that stakeholders are bought in, and is motivated to participate on a sustainable basis, in the whole scheme of watershed management. Okay, and what you needed to do is, for us in Manila Bay, it was important that the plan is inclusive, comprehensive, and integrated. Okay, if we cannot have a Manila Bay master plan that that is catering only to the private sector or to the environmentalist group, or to the urban group, okay, it has to be inclusive. It is not only for the businessman, but it should also be for the informal settlers, and different kinds of other stakeholders. If we are not as inclusive as that, let's forget about, we could have forgotten about stakeholder engagement and do the planning ourselves. Okay, but this is what we need, because we want the master plan to be embraced, by the stakeholders. Okay, but it doesn't mean that stakeholder engagement will by itself also promote or ensure that the plan that you will produce will be automatically, embraced by the different stakeholders, especially by government agencies. This is a reality that we need to accept, and to be able to deal with appropriately. Okay, so but this is something that we needed to do, in engaging the stakeholder. We make it inclusive, comprehensive, and integrated, and the plan or the management scheme should geared to achievement of multiple stakeholders, and then the plan should pursue sustainable balance of ecological protection and economic development goals. We cannot just talk about, enhancing the ecosystems within Manila Bay without actually talking about what the potential contribution of Manila Bay or the entire Manila Bay basin is to economic development. Remember, in the basin of Manila Bay, we have the entire NCR, which is actually, or where most of our economic activities are happening. And if we cannot, factor them into the master plan, then our master plan is doomed. Okay, the plan is practical and relevant to the needs of the stakeholders, and this is what we wanted to assure the stakeholders. And this is why we came back to them many times during the entire process, before we finally got the completed master plan. The plan that supports achievement of stakeholders' aspiration and plan that is in synergy with development plans of LGUs and GAs and other sectors. Again, this is what is already there. We cannot just forget about them and say, no, forget all about them, we'll have this new plan, okay, for Manila Bay. We cannot do that. So this is the entire planning phase, plan development phase for Manila Bay. And we started with inception, with situational analysis, with strategy building, drafting the master plan, and then until we reached to the final report. Okay, but we did also action planning. We fine-tune the master plan, we update the master plan, and then we update the action plan and investment plan. So as you can see, this is really something that is progressive but iterative in a way, because you tend to go back to the stakeholders, every now and then, and this is what we have. We have facilitating factors for stakeholder engagement, and we have essential negotiation processes set in place. Okay, and these are the facilitating factors are clear technical, spatial, and temporal boundaries. Dapat maliwanag yon, ano? Dapat maliwanag itong pinag-uusapan namin pagdating sa pagdating sa Manila Bay Basin, and that's true also for your watershed. Make sure that you know exactly what is the bounds and limits of what you are talking about. Saan ang boundary ng watershed, you know? What impact areas are we trying to include, you know, in decision making for this particular watershed? Those has to be very clear. And then common commitment to implement outputs. There has to be an agreement from the beginning, you know, that we are committed to do this from the beginning all the way to implementation, you know, until we achieve our objectives. And then common sense of urgency. We need to have everybody feel about this. Otherwise, you know, when there is no felt urgency in the need of doing doing the watershed management plan or doing watershed management in general, you know, then it will be difficult for us to gather around the stakeholders, you know, and get them involved for something that they feel is not urgent, and that there should be common appreciation for the need to negotiate. Okay, this is very important. We need people to understand, you know, working with us, that they cannot dominate the whole process, because the entire process is multi-stakeholder. It should be participatory and democratic, and there should be equity even in making decision, and people has to realize this, you know. And while there will be groups that will be very aggressive, you know, asserting as if they are the main stakeholder group, you know, and that they have the full right, you know, over a particular watershed, you know, that you will have to be able to manage, you know, to make them feel that they have to work together. Okay, if they are to come up with something that is acceptable to everyone and implementable. And then we need inclusive stakeholder representation, and this happened during the entire process, as you can see, from inception all the way to updating and finalizing the master plan. Stakeholders are there, you know, stakeholders are there, and there is, you know, there is also the proper balance of power, as I just mentioned. Okay. And for the kickoff meeting, these are the stakeholder engagement activities that we did. You know, some of them are very, I mean, most of them are very, very familiar to most of us. Okay, and then we have the wide, you know, the entire watershed management stakeholder population. And then we do have technical committee meetings. These are just to make sure that before we bring up issues to the stakeholder at large, you know, that we are very sure about the technical soundness of anything, of plan or a program or a concept. Okay, that's why we have technical committee meetings. All right, now I think I will stop there. I still have a few slides, you know, which is going now to be very, very particular, you know, very, very specific. But I think, you know, with the time that I was given, actually, I was given only 20 minutes, and now I am past 33 minutes. You know, I'll stop here to give other speakers the chance to share their presentation as well. You know, in as much as I know that I have shared with you things that are actually of essence when we talk about stakeholder engagement in watershed management. So there, I stop there, and thank you very much again. You know, I hope to interact with you at the end of, I mean, during the question and answer forum. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Rex. So napaka-informative po nung talk ni Sir Rex. Nakaka-resonate po rin sa ating lahat yung sinabi niya, especially about dun sa engaging or identifying your stakeholders and committing to them. And also yung remark ni Sir about transparency in information sharing, and also in the decision-making process. So napaka-importante po nun. Okay, so to move on to the next part of our program, let me call on our second speaker for this webinar. So none other than the current Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dean Marlo Mendoza. Sir?
Just is my slide coming up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, good morning. Thank you, Raymond. Good morning din kay ASEC Mars, no? ASEC Amaro, and kay Director Dolom, and of course kay Chancellor Rex, and kay Forester Cabrera. Sir Rex, mukhang naubusan na ako ng na-present na lahat ni Chancellor Rex, no? Anyway, what I will be doing is I'll just briefly be talking about the DAO, and then I would like to spend more time sa case study, no? Let's see how others, other groups or other stakeholders have organized themselves and are able to work together to achieve their common goals, no? So let me start first by showing this. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar already with this. Dr. Rex has already talked a lot about the various stakeholders, no, inside the watershed, and each of them, no, they have their own mga reasons, no, for being there, and they have their own needs also. And imagine if there are thousands of them, mostly economic yung reasons nila. So we call that yung drivers, no? What are their motivations, no? Why they are inside the watershed? Normally it's for food. They need the land for food again. Others for other forest products and non-timber products, shelter. So competing demands for this, no? Yung mga provisioning services ng watersheds, no? Dami-dami na nila na nagko-compete for that. And then as they compete for these resources, it creates pressure, no? Creates so much pressure on the watershed. And then a lot of this is in the form of pollutants, no? And these pollutants, they're transported, especially if they're in the uplands, goes down until the reef, no? Until the aquatic resources natin. And then gradually, as it continues, as the pressure continues, the state of the environment, the state of the watershed will change. Right? So in terms of species composition, distribution, the quality of the resource, and eventually it will impact, no? Impact on the different ecosystem services. So what we do, we have different policies, no? In our case, we're talking basically based on the paper that I was given. So we're talking about watershed management councils, no? And ito yung mga DAO natin on DAO 200805, which was it's about guidelines in the preparation of integrated watershed management plans. Then we have DAO 2005-23, adopting and implementing a collaborative approach to watershed management. Then we also have this technical bulletin, or more recent one, in July 27, 2015 also. Supplemental guidelines. Ito naman is about preparation of characterization reports on vulnerability assessment, no, of the watersheds. So these are policies that the government, specifically the DENR, has passed to be able to address the challenges, no, confronting these watersheds. And this is a sample of how the logic, no, in from identifying the problems and then looking at what particular drivers, as Dr. Rex has already explained, we have to be able to pinpoint exactly what are the problems, no, we call drivers, no? It can be population growth, urbanization, industrialization, agricultural expansion, no, which creates pressures and so forth. And then we have a lot of policies here as a response. What's also very important that I'd like to emphasize, we should have a very sound baseline, and then that baseline we have to continuously monitor, at least if you have resources, twice a year, during the rainy season and the dry season, or at least once a year, no? So that we'll know whether the responses or the the policies which is translated into programs are really working. Because if we do not do regular monitoring or longitudinal monitoring, we're not sure whether the policies and programs strategies we have adopted are effective. Okay. So I think I won't talk much about these administrative orders because you can easily look at this, the content. First, the objective of DAO 2005 is ensuring sustainable use of watershed resources and to encourage meaningful and active participation of the different stakeholders. Dr. Rex has already talked a lot about that. And that in engaging the stakeholders, we have to follow sound environmental governance principles. Of course, participatory, then those who committed to be part of implementing those programs should also be made accountable. In the first place, they're the ones who approve the plans and programs, so they have to also be made accountable, whether in the first place they implemented it or not. And then use of science in all aspects of our management. Okay. I was also involved in studying 11 watersheds, where Dr. Rex is the program leader, the program leader, where these are the issues and challenges we got from the 11 watersheds that we studied. There are three major groups. Organizational challenges. This is very common, low participation of Watershed Management Council members, especially from government agencies, where they have several commitments also. No governing structure for full-time personnel and inadequate funding to sustain the employment of personnel in project-based initiatives. So it's very common. Once the funding stops, then the project also stops. There's no continuity. Implementation often becomes ad hoc. And then overlapping governance frameworks, no legal mandate for the creation of watershed management councils. Others, there are LGUs, the provincial government have issued ordinances, creating ordinance creating the Watershed Management Council. Others are through MOA, and then also there's no very clear delineation of responsibilities among the agencies involved, and the tenure holders and other stakeholders inside the watershed. Of course, lack of financial resources, non-availability or lack of baseline data. We tend to rely on secondary data, and it's also very expensive to collect primary data. But if you are dealing with the resource that's progressively changing due to the drivers, we really have to collect a lot of primary data. But due to absence of or limited resources, we're not able to do that. So sometimes we base our planning not on empirical evidences. And then, one of the watershed management councils in the Philippines that have been very active is the Iloilo Watershed Management Council. It's a multi-sectoral body created by provincial local government ordinance, through an ordinance in 2000, follows a multi-tiered, multi-stakeholder approach. And they also have watershed boards or sub-councils for the sub-watersheds, and it's composed of 15 members. And so forth. I'd like to spend more time to talk about one of the very good models in the world, I would say, globally. And I have been following this up. And I also had the opportunity actually to visit this area. And this is the New York west of Hudson watershed. It's a very good model because it's big, it's huge, no? 1,600 square miles, around 4,144 square kilometers. In this watershed, no, this is where New York City gets its water. And whatever happens here, there are 6 reservoirs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not here, 6. That's where the water supply of New York City comes from. And there are 9 million people, no, who benefits or who are very dependent on this watershed. And again, there are many stakeholders. So what did they do? How did they organize themselves? How were they able actually to harmonize their different goals, no? Their conflicting at times objectives. So what they did, well, what triggered it in the first place? No? The MOA, the agreement is in a form of MOA. No? So the different stakeholders got together and there's a legal instrument. They call it the Memorandum of Agreement. What initiated or instigated it is that when the US EPA promulgated the surface water treatment rule, mandating all surface drinking water sources to meet certain quality standards. So at the time, the New York City, no, when they looked at, based on evidences, I think certain pollutants, no, are actually in the borderline or exceeding some of the standards. And the city government estimated they will need 4 to 6 billion pesos just to set up the filtration plants, no? And it will take millions of dollars to operate that filtration plant. So they now thought of an option, no? And this is the option. Instead of putting up a filtration plant, they opted to organize the different stakeholders and come into an agreement that they will all work together, no, to ensure that the surface water quality will be meeting the government standards. So it took 7 months of intense negotiations. Si Dr. Rex, I think more than 6 months, sabi niya, no? Very intense negotiations. And after a year, nagkaroon na sila ng, the MOU was translated into a Memorandum of Agreement. No? And then in the MOA, they decided to put up a Watershed Protection and Partnership Council. And the council is composed of broad-based diverse groups of interest. No? But they share a common goal of protecting both environmental integrity and take note, no? It's not only environmental integrity, but the economic vitality of the communities living inside, no? Should also be able to be carried out. So it's both environmental, social, and economic. No? And the council has no regulatory powers. No? Regulatory powers rests with the different agencies who are tasked to implement this and these laws. No? It's also a forum to exchange views, concerns, ideas, and then there's a periodic review, no, on all of the efforts done by private and government agencies. The council has 27 members, no? And out of the 27, there are 16 executive members that comprises the executive committee. So executive committee is part of the Watershed Protection and Partnership Council, and then plus other members. So this is the structure. You have the Watershed Protection Partnership Council, then you have the EXECOM, and then geographically, there are also committees, no, to represent, no, different areas. Probably we can call it subcatchments. No? And there's a technical advisory committee. Executive committee serve as forum where disputes between parties may be referred and resolved. And these are the members. No? Some are appointed, members are appointed by the governor, the mayor, and there are also some ex officio members. So the executive committee is responsible for establishing and overseeing any committees or subcommittees reviewing implementation of watershed regulations, etc. And they have to submit an annual report. Advisory, technical committee. Anyway, these are representatives from geographical areas. The technical advisory committee reports on technical issues, no, on covering the entire watershed. And then the Executive Council, it's also indicated in the MOA who will implement the programs. Because in the MOA, it's stipulated there what kind of program should be implemented. Okay, so they formed a not-for-profit corporation. They called it the Catskill Watershed Corporation. It's the corporation that's staffed adequately that will implement the watershed protection and partnership programs, and also high investment infrastructures like you have to put up sewage treatment facilities, stormwater, septic system, stream corridor protection. It's this corporation, which is a not-for-profit, that implements this infrastructure and also soft and hard programs. And okay, where does the funding come from? It mostly comes from the city. Okay, so exactly how? They call it the payment for ecosystem services. So it's a part of the water bill, and part of the what's being paid by those using the water downstream is inputted in the form of programs and infrastructure that's being implemented by this not-for-profit corporation. Even the staff is being funded from PS, and also some other funding coming from the governor, the mayor, also complements or supplements the funding. And this organizational structure and the positions. And then programs, I'd like to talk about briefly about the programs. This is something that also that's very interesting. Land acquisition program. So properties can be purchased, especially properties that will act as buffer lands around reservoirs, their tributaries, to ensure protecting the water quality. But what's nice here, it does not, when you say land acquisition, it does not always actually mean purchasing, the city government or the Catskill corporation actually purchasing the property and alienating the owner. That's an option, but the property owner can just be compensated, but there will be restrictions on how the property can be used. Example, I have a hectare inside that area. According to the MOA and the agreement that I'll be entering into with the Catskill Corporation, I cannot do intensive farming on slopes beyond 18%, or I cannot apply fertilizer that will be or pest.
In Marlo, are you still there? I think we're having some technical difficulties. So before, while we wait for Dean Marlo to for setting up for answering the difficulties, let me just remind everyone that we'll be posting the post evaluation after this forum that will serve as evidence, and also for those who are answering their asking questions for their presentation. Yes, we will be providing them. Just email us your request, and then also, if you have questions, you can use the question and answer tab. Just kindly state your name, your affiliation, and whom the question is being asked, and then we'll gladly recognize it. And then if there's more time, we will give the question to our speakers. So is Dean? Okay. I think Dean is having some technical difficulties. Okay. Again, to answer the questions or queries from our chat and our Q&A tab, presentations will be given provided that you email us, okay, for our request of the presentation. We will gladly send them to you. Our email is fdc.uplb@up.edu.ph, or you can contact us through our Facebook page, UPLB Forestry Development Center. Just search for us on Facebook and then chat us for your requests. Okay. Any update on Dean Marlo's connection? I think something went wrong with the connection of our second speaker. For those asking for an attendance, we will be giving an evaluation form link just before the end of this webinar. So kindly answer it, and it will serve as the attendance for this activity. We'll be also sending the certificate of participation or attendance in this webinar. So while we are waiting for Dean Marlo, okay, please follow us if you are liking this. If you like being involved or attending seminars being produced by the Forestry Development Center, please follow us on social media. Okay, we have UPLB Forestry Development Center for our Facebook page. You can also follow the Forest Management Bureau of the DENR for the Save Our Watershed campaign. Also, the Forestland Management Project and Save Our Watershed Facebook page. We are also in YouTube. Okay, UPLB Forestry Development Center. Please click the subscribe button and you will be able to see all our past webinars and our future projects there. So kindly throw us a follow and like our videos. So I think Dean Marlo is here already. Dean? Marlo?
Yeah, sorry, I was talking, wala na pala akong connection. Can I share my screen, please?
Okay. Wait, sir. I will try to. Okay, sir. You can share your screen now. Marlo?
I still can't share my.
It says here that your network bandwidth is low, so let me just try. Okay. Can you now share, sir? Marlo?
Okay.
Yes. Okay. I think Sir Marlo's experiencing connection. Yeah, okay.
Again. Okay. So conservation easements, no? The land that as I was saying a while ago, the landowner, once he or she signs the agreement with a Catskill corporation to follow to be part of the program, there will be certain restrictions that they in using their land, no. So any property acquired in fee by the city will have a conservation easement placed on it to ensure that the land will be held in perpetuity in an undeveloped state. And then that's also done for agricultural easements, no? Where conservation easements placed on land that is in active agricultural production, putting certain restrictions on future use and development of the property. So I think this is a very innovative approach. You know, you don't just say that a property owner should limit what they can do on their land, but in this case, they're also compensated. And then they also have the watershed protection and partnership programs established to maintain okay. And then aside from the broad bigger council, no, there's also another council. They call it the Watershed Agricultural Council. This council works with hundreds of farm and forest land owners inside the watershed. So, but this is like a smaller council being overseen, no, by the Watershed Protection Council. No? Here, this agricultural council works with farm and forest land owners to protect water quality in behalf of the 9 million New York residents. Organization is locally controlled, again, through a not-for-profit structure. Participation is voluntary. And in here, strategic watershed management approaches are applied and incentivized. No? So again, they compensate. No? They can compensate the landowners to adopt a farm plan. No? Like the council will help landowners address water pollution concerns through the following: full farm plans, forest management plans, or conservation easements. And this will all be funded through the PES, no? By the New York City Water Service. No? And then the council calls on technical expertise from different groups, the USDA, county soil and water conservation districts, etc. Team approach with landowners in addressing water quality. Then the Watershed Agricultural Council planning system, no, the whole farm planning. Okay, I'll just it's a holistic approach to farm management used to identify and prioritize environmental issues without compromising the farm business. That's very important for them. No? You still have to continue making money, no, from your farm or from your forest estate, but you have to follow certain regulations. No? It's 100% voluntary, but if you sign up, no, you'll be eligible for some sort of compensation or funding to implement the plan. And then they also have the farm-based management practices. These are conservation practices meant to prevent or reduce the amount of pollution generated by non-point sources. So a process begins when a farmer signs a voluntary participation agreement. No? Okay, and these are the pollutants. No? They've already identified pollutants that should be regulated or that should be controlled, or if not, stopped. No? And then for every pollutant, every activity that will have a negative impact, they already have guidelines or procedures how to address it. No? Okay, so the farm plan, no, is developed both by the landowner and the technical team. So that's the difference. No? They do not just regulate the landowner, but there's a technical team who will help prepare the farm plan and help the landowner implement the farm plan, and also help the landowner in monitoring the progress, no, of implementing the farm plan. No? So New York City pays 100% of the cost to create and implement the plans. Other federal, state, local programs offer PES also, compensating landowners for their involvement in these natural resource conservation programs. Okay, land and water conservation measures or best management practices may include any of the following. No? And it's very clear that the farmers will be able to comply properly, no, if they are aware, if they are equipped and capacitated. So farmers okay, so there's a continuing farmer education program, no? So they have a full calendar of workshops and conferences, so the farmer will be able to comply, no, and be capacitated to be able to implement the content, no, of the program. And then another feature that I like here is that they do very scientific monitoring. Like a paired watershed research design is utilized, consisting of one farm and another non-agricultural control site, no, to check whether the interventions contained in the farm plan is really effective, no. So they have with and without, no, with and without intervention, and this is consistently being monitored, no? Okay, so what can we learn from here? What can we learn from here? There are it's not enough to have policies. So once we craft a policy, it's very important on how we will be able to implement that policy. So that may require putting up, organizing an office, no, or putting up a structure staffed with competent people to be able to implement whatever watershed and management development plans we have implemented, no? And then I think I also like the idea that rather than just restricting what a landowner can do on his or her particular land, we have to compensate them if we will be putting restrictions, because that will affect the economic activity of the landowner. And then all inhabitants inside that watershed have a tenure. In our case, we have a lot of people inside the watershed that are not tenured, so it's very difficult to actually regulate them. It's very difficult to have a program if people have no tenure, no? And then in this case, the legal basis for their getting together and agreeing to work together is a MOA. And then it's very science-based, no? And practice of good governance actually is very evident. And the PES, or payment for ecosystem services, is really being practiced here, no? Because who benefits are people in the lowland for their drinking water. So they have to be willing, no, to compensate people in the uplands so that they can actually practice, no, sound watershed management practices. So I think that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Marlo, Mendoza, for your presentation. So I hope everyone got the gist of Dean Marlo Mendoza's presentation, especially the part where presented a very good blueprint that we can maybe emulate for our own watershed management program. Okay, so to move on, to call the last speaker of for this webinar, let me call on Forester Anselmo P. Cabrera to present. Sir?
Thank you, Raymond, and good morning to all. Good morning to Dr. Rex, Dean Marlo, and kay ASEC. This is also our FMB director. Thank you for the opportunity sharing our initiative in the Forestland Management Project. So I'll be discussing about the experiences that we are doing, the activities that we are doing related to the formation of the Watershed Management Councils in the provinces where the Forestland Management Project is working. So I'll be discussing our experience in the three major sub-watersheds or sub-river basins in Region 2 and one in Iloilo. And we'll also be sharing some insights on how we collaborate with the Protected Area Management Board of the Pantabangan-Caranglan Watershed Management Council in Region 3 as part of the initiatives of the project under the policy initiative. So I think Dr. Rex also provided more foundations with respect to how stakeholders should be engaged in watershed management. And all the best practices was also discussed related to the Manila Basin. I think most of the watershed management undertaking all over the country. And I also thank Dr. Dean Marlo for sharing the experiences in New York. I was also following that when I was in the Wiser program, because we've been developing the conservation financing mechanism for some of the watersheds or some of the forest lands where stakeholders are highly engaged. Okay, for my outline, I'll be providing a very brief discussion about the FMP, which I think in previous discussion, it was also discussed. The basis for how we organize the Watershed Management Council, and who are the stakeholders that should be involved or primarily be involved. I think there is always a consideration on how to prioritize stakeholders in the Watershed Management Council, because putting all these stakeholders in a council will be quite chaotic in terms of its operations. You know? So I'll be discussing also some of the insights on how to go about it. And the framework and process which we followed in the project, and the capacity building that we are doing with the Watershed Management Council, the way forward, because the project is still ongoing and we still have 1 year to do some of the foundational mechanisms to be able to make the Watershed Management Council sustainable, and some of the lessons. So the Forestland Management Project is operating in three major river basins, one in Cagayan and in Upper Pampanga in Region 3 and the Halaur River Basin in Region 6. So for Upper Cagayan, we are practically working on two major sub-river basins, Magat and one in Ganano in Quirino. And in Upper Pampanga, it's practically the area covered by the Pantabangan-Caranglan Watershed Forest Reserve, which is where the Pantabangan Dam is also located. So Halaur River Basin, maybe some of you are also familiar with the Halaur. A new big project, the JRMP2, it's a dam that's being established now in Halaur. I think it's not yet completed, but it's about to operate within a year or two. So some of the performance measure of the project, if you would note, we are now operating in 24 sub-watersheds within the three major river basins that I've discussed, and we are working closely with 149 people's organizations and indigenous people's organizations. So this is being organized and being mobilized under the Community-Based Forest Management Program. And we are also doing 100 agroforestry support facilities with the intention of linking people to market with the establishment of farm-to-market roads, and some of the support facilities in ensuring that the agroforestry production will be properly supported. So we are also implementing various forestation and agroforestry modalities all over the sub-watersheds, the 24 sub-watersheds, and around implementing 149 micro-enterprises, including the agroforestry value chain clusters that we are piloting, and which I think is one of the pioneering initiative now in terms in being done for the community-based forest management program. So, and lastly, the 4 Watershed Management Council and 1 Protected Area Management Board, the 3 of which we were the one who organized them, and the Protected Area Management Board in Region 3 has been there for, I think, several years prior to the project. So some of the inputs that we are also doing, of course, we continuously provide the guidelines on the policies and the continuous capacity building for all the POs and the Watershed Management Council, the continuous monitoring evaluation and IEC advocacy, which I think this webinar is part, and the bigger contribution of project management, because we have established, I think, 32 sub-offices for the 3 regions that we are operating. So ito yung mapa, pardon for the maps because our GIS officer is no longer accessible. But nonetheless, these are the 3 major sub-river basins that we are operating. So for Upper and Magat in Ganano, we are operating 70 sub-watersheds, and Pantaban Karanglan 4 sub-watersheds, and Halao River Basins 3 sub-watersheds. So for the site development, ito yung 71,300 hectares of site development targets for all these 24 sub-watersheds. The biggest is in Magat, and of course, it's followed by Pantabangan and then the Halao River Basin. Okay, my topic is about how to improve or strengthen the governance mechanism through the Watershed Management Council. I think in the later part of 1990s and the early part of 2000s, the governance discussion became a buzzword of development work, especially those working with the local government unit. And I was fortunate enough to be part of one of the major USAID project then, the environmental governance, who promoted the participation or active participation and role of the local government units in land use planning, solid waste management, and overall environment and natural resources management. So then we tried to come up with a definition of what really environmental governance as appropriately applied in the Philippines. So it is the process by which the power and authority are exercised by mandated government institutions together with non-government stakeholders. So you would note that in governance, I think it was also discussed by Dean Marlo, that it requires the basic 3 principles of participation, transparency, and accountability to be able to master or implement or operate as an institution in contributing to environmental governance in general. So specifically for watershed, I've been looking about for the definition of watershed governance, and I only found one which is from one of the sources in Canada. This is organizing and focusing decision making to better align with ecological boundaries and addressing ecological health and functions of the watersheds. So in short, governance is about how the decisions are made and upheld within the watershed. So when we say decision, it comes now the principle of how participation should come in. It comes now how the decision is being made. So we've been discussing also about the scientific way by which the watershed should be managed and governed, Therefore, part of the decision making should be based on the well-informed, possibly scientific inputs, with scientific inputs. I think some of the presentations provided also by Dr. Rex is also related on how we use the scientific means of managing the watershed in ensuring that the watershed should be appropriately governed and managed. So it's important for us to also look at this basic principle when we organize the Watershed Management Council, because as also said, those who decide is the fate of the environment, and this is also true for the watershed. I just tried to also distinguish or disaggregate the basic concept of watershed governance and watershed management is, because actually interchangeably it's being used now. Watershed governance and management is inseparable. So watershed governance is about the who, or who has the mandate, on how we exercise the power and authority to enable watershed management to happen. So this is also the case that we are promoting in the formation of the council, that the council should be able to have some kind of governance power over the watershed through collaboration and participation of all stakeholders within that watershed. And the management practically are the exercise of regulation and control. So this should be done in a way by which the LGU knows what to do. So the management plan in particular is very helpful in really doing the science-based watershed management in a specific area. And combining the two should lead to the improved condition of the ecosystems within the watershed. So practically, this is the basic model that we are applying in the Forestland Management Project when we advocate when we organize the Watershed Management Council. So I also reviewed some of the documents related to how governance in the Philippines is being done in the watersheds, but most of the mandates that can be found in some of the literatures provide only for water governance. So it's very specific for most of the institutions that are involved in the governance of the water and watersheds to only with highly specialized mandate. So if you would note, NEDA, for example, National Water Regulatory Board, for example, are really intended for water. It's only the DENR who has the overall encompassing mandate over the watersheds. But not all agencies have comprehensive watershed management agenda and programs and projects being implemented for watershed management. So specifically, I would like to note that the National Power Corporation has, based on law, are provided with the authority to use some of the collections. They call it under EPIRA law. This is the environmental charge being used to finance watershed conservation in the areas being operated by the National Power Corporation. So I think this is the only concrete and more holistic governance mechanism that are already established based on law. So nabanggit din kanina ni Dean Marlo that there is no law governing the overall governance of watershed in the Philippines, primarily the formation of the Watershed Management Council. So we only rely on the issuances made by the DENR with respect to promoting collaboration, which I think is provided under DAO 2005-23, if I'm not mistaken. So, yun, malaki yung we have a lot of gaps in terms of the policy and how these policies will be operationalized to be able to really come up with a highly integrated watershed management in the Philippines. So for the formation of the Watershed Management Council under the Forestland Management Program, we follow the basic premise provided in our institutional development plan prepared by, I think, one of our own before, it's Dr. Contreras. So we practically use the same principle of adaptive collaborative management or co-management in council formation, where we allow learning process to be the overall principle in ensuring stakeholders collaboration. So it means that among stakeholders, we allow learning exchange in the process of formation as well as in the overall operation of the council. And when we say collaborative, these are all the stakeholders. I think Dr. Rex has already provided a lot of discussions or insights on how the stakeholders should participate in watershed management. And the same is true was applied in the Forestland Management Project. So first step that we did is to identify stakeholders. Stakeholders that primarily has the mandate. I think these are the government agencies and the local government units, as well as those who has the interest. And primarily those who has the interest in the land or natural resources are practically resource users. So in the process of formation of the Watershed Management Council, we identified this and analyzed them in such a manner that we would like to know which stakeholders has the primary stake or the bigger stake in the watershed and who should lead in terms of mobilizing the council. So aside from knowing their specific interest in particular, because all of these has their own interests. For example, the Farmers or Irrigators Association, although they may be offsite of the forest land, but they have also interest in terms of using water for their activities. So these are the first step that we did, and we see that the Watershed Management Council will provide the venue for integration of all these interests and as well as integration of all the mandates. Aside from ensuring that all the conflicting interests will also be discussed and addressed within the council. So it's important that we continue the discussion with all the stakeholders so that they will also address on their own whatever are conflicts in terms of using the natural resources within the watershed through the council. So ito yung tinignan namin na isang importanteng steps, primarily to identify the stakeholder and then do the consultative dialogues. So we conducted a lot of consultative dialogues prior to formation so that we'll be able to come into terms or agreement on how to move forward with the formation of the council. So the foundational covenant was also established. We discussed about the key roles and responsibilities of each of the stakeholders. It was included in the manual of operation, how each one will work and what contribution will be done for the council. And thirdly, the consultation with Sangguniang Panlalawigan and the governor, because we see the importance of the provincial government to lead the entire process along with the DENR. And through this, we made a lot of presentation with the Sangguniang Panlalawigan so that they'll also be able to appreciate the importance of the collaboration in managing the watershed in the province. And part of the discussion also deals about the harmonization of the provincial and municipal plans and agenda. which I think was also appropriately discussed also with previous presenter. So related to water security, the disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation and mitigation. So the formation of the technical working group was also done, and the group was the one who facilitated the drafting of the executive order that will be signed by the provincial governor. So, and then the issuance of PO, crafting or creating the council is done. So kung makikita natin, all these steps, there are consultations that are being undertaken. So hindi ganun ka straightforward na may issue lang talaga yung executive order, so that para bago dumating tayo sa dulo, we'll be able to have a very common agenda for the Watershed Management Council. So these are the executive order issued. Sabi ko nga, we have facilitated the formation of the 3 management councils. And we have the existing ones in Patabangan, Karanglan, Watershed Forest Reserve, as well as Halaon River Basin, which I think Dean Marlo also cited a while ago. So kung makikita nyo, the formation or the council has a multi-stakeholder membership. And practically all these stakeholders represent all sectors within the province. So all the interests are already represented, as well as the institutions that are mandated to be able to contribute in watershed conservation. Okay, what are the primary functions? Based on the executive order that have been approved or issued by the governor, these are the key functions provided in as part of the functions of the council. Review and approve the programs and projects related to watershed. Develop the cost sharing or any conservation financing mechanism. I think Dean Marlo also discussed about the payment for ecosystem services. Enable collaboration and support to watershed conservation. So relatedly, we did a lot on this one related to the implementation and operationalization of the cost sharing mechanism, as well as in enabling the support to watershed conservation, which I will discuss in the later slides. IEC and advocacy and the monitoring evaluation system, and the watershed development and the establishment of the watershed database, as well as come up with the policy recommendations, maybe at least at the local level, municipal and provincial, that may be translated into provincial and municipal ordinances. So these are the example of the structure that they agreed on to operationalize the council. On the left side is the Iloilo Integrated Watershed Management Council that was established, I think, early 2000. This is prior to the project. And you would note that the overall structure provides for the decentralized management of sub-watersheds within Halaon River Basin. And there is a primary role provided to LGUs in the overall decentralized operations, so that there is a very clear accountability center even within the council. So for the PAMB, you would note that there are various technical committees, although PAMB is operating differently from the typical Watershed Management Council that we organized, because PAMB is more concerned about the protected area. But nonetheless, what we did in the PAMB of Region 3 is to also include the watershed management concerns as part of the overall function of the Protected Area Management Board, being that the protected area is also a critical watershed. So it's part of the overall function now. So forest and watershed and biodiversity conservation and management. So part of the capacity building that we are doing is to helped the council come up with a manual of operation. So in this manual of operation, we laid down all the foundational mechanisms for the council to support the operation of the council. We came up with a strategic plan. In the absence of management plan, I think it is also important for the council to come up with an agreement on way forward on what to support to in terms of watershed conservation. And since the formulation of watershed management plan will take time, we facilitated on the interim, the use in the interim, the strategic plan that may be magnified or expanded into a watershed management plan later once it is already possible for the Watershed Management Council. And the cost sharing mechanism, and then the training needs assessment and the conduct of training, as well as the functionality assessment. The cost sharing mechanism, we established the guidelines on this one, and I'll show you later. And the training needs assessment and the training provided is also being done by the project. Functionality assessment is already conducted in some of this Watershed Management Council with the intention of come up with a recommendation vis-a-vis the best practices that should be established within the council. So we came up with the criteria on the assessment of the overall governance functionality of the councils that we may use in other watersheds in the country. So this is the manual of operations that this is in Nueva Vizcaya and one in Ifugao. Practically, it provides for the operating framework, the watershed management structure, the institutional arrangements, the rules for meetings and financing, the operations, as well as how collaboration and partnership within and outside of the council will be done. And this is the example of the strategic plan, although this is just the summary of the strategic plan that we developed for the Watershed Management Council. And the cost sharing mechanism. So the intention for the cost sharing mechanism is to establish a more localized resource pooling or resource generation scheme to support watershed conservation as well as the overall operation of the council. So it promotes the whole of society contributions in watershed conservation, and by doing so also promotes greater appreciation on the value of watershed and ecosystem services. So we identified in the guidelines, we identified the windows of opportunity from which each stakeholder will also contribute in watershed conservation. And we use this in the strategic plan as a means to be able to join partners within the Watershed Management Council to contribute in both in kind actually and monetary in watershed conservation. So here we identified and do the inventory of the existing programs and projects, and we lobbied for the inclusion of the priorities to the provincial investment plans as well as the municipal investment plans. And then we facilitated the investment programmings. And now, after identifying the possible projects by each municipalities as well as private stakeholders, then we came up now with the list of like project portfolio from which each stakeholder now will contribute in the implementation. So this is quite an innovation because we promote this as a more of a local funding or fund generation mechanism with the view that there'll be no more projects that will come as big as FMP, and that it is also part of our sustainability mechanism by which each LGU now and private partner will have some contribution in watershed conservation moving forward. So what are the way forwards for the project? We are doing some management planning on a sub-watershed scale. We are still completing that. And we will be establishing a performance-based monitoring and reporting system for each of the Watershed Management Council, institutionalized state of the watershed reporting. So based on the indices that will be identified as the basis for the monitoring, will also include that as part of the state of the watershed report. So that the state of the watershed report will be used as a transparent instrument by which all stakeholders will share, so that they know now the extent of the contribution in watershed conservation and how the watershed is now improving with that contributions being done by all partner stakeholders. So setting up database management system, and we'll continue the capacity building as well as the IEC work, and strengthen network and linkage with research group. So we are doing now some collaboration with various academic institutions to be able to get more researchers as part of the inputs in watershed decision making, Watershed Management Council decision making. And follow up on the national directive, I think ASEC Marcial also discussed about the EO that we have drafted for the sustainable watershed management in the Philippines. And lastly, some of our key takeaways, WMC best showcase decentralized governance of watershed following the whole of society approach. Sorry, I was also already prompted. Easier mobilization of resources by aligning with stakeholders' interests, and create more windows of doable and localized initiative in watershed conservation. So WMC also creates point of convergences for other water development undertakings, such as linking POs to institutions to be able to tap more support for the implementation of community-based forest management, for example. And collaboration and partnership are already given in the council. So it's no longer difficult to master support in overall watershed conservation and management. So thank you for the opportunity of sharing the experiences of FMP.
Thank you, Sir Ansel. So, the presentation ni Sir Ansel, pinakita niya sa atin yung mga brief overview ng water or establishing a water management council, kaya mga key takeaways and ways forward natin. So I think the three speakers deserves a virtual round of applause from participants and our attendees. Okay, thank you for the applause. So, pupunta na po tayo sa pinaka meatiest part of our webinar, which is the question and answer or open forum. So, let me call on Forester Judith to moderate the open forum. Yes. Forester
Okay.
Judith.
Thank you, Raymond, and thank you to our speakers, Doc Rex, Dean Marlo, and Sir Ansel. Going back to our house rules, questions may be asked via the Q&A tab in our Zoom and via comment section for our FB live streaming. And if you wish to speak, you may click the raise button and we will acknowledge, and so you could speak. And only unmute your microphone if you are given the signal to speak. We will entertain one or two live questions. Okay, we have here some questions from our participants, starting with a question from Sir Eric Buduan. Anyone from our speakers can answer this. How can these good practices on stakeholder management be institutionalized and considered in government policies, programs, and projects, and be implemented effectively on the ground? Okay, sir, who would like to answer? Yes, sir.
Mukhang, sige, according to age tayo. Anyway, there are, well, ideally talaga, no? Ideally, we can do this through legislation, and that's why it is included in the proposed Sustainable Forest Management Bill, no? But we know that is a long shot, and maybe we cannot wait for that, because things are already moving on the ground, as was what was presented by Ansel, and because of this, we see that another modality can be, through the actions of the local government unit themselves, taking upon themselves to actually do the institutionalizing themselves, which they can very well do. There's nothing that will prevent them from doing that. No? And at their own level, they can decide, and they can actually resolve to form, Watershed Management Council as a form of structure to engage, effectively the different stakeholders in watershed management. So I think that is what is doable for now, while we wait for a more permanent policy issuance. We can do it through the initiatives of the local government units.
Or if I may add also, we have
Sure,
models
sir.
naman talaga na we want to institutionalize, but that requires basically a big constraint is the funding. We have models like we have the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, we have the Laguna Lake Development Authority, we have the Metro Manila Development Authority. So we can have an authority or a council that's funded and legislated. But as Dr. Rex has said, that's a long shot. No? And I think the ECS model is like what's being done by other LGUs. You have a local government initiated ordinances. But at the end of the day, even you have an ordinance, you don't have a mechanism to fund your programs. You'll just have unfunded programs. You'll just have unfunded plans. So I think the idea of really operationalizing, implementing a PES system should really be started. That has to be pursued. Unless we have a government that can finance all of the plans and programs, but in our case, of course, we have very limited funding. So we have to have innovative ways of funding. We have to ask the users of the resource to bear some of the costs. So I think yun lang yung sabi ko.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Eric. And
Sir Ansel. Okay, mukhang nagkaroon po ng technical problem si Sir Ansel.
Judith, let
Okay.
me, can
Yes,
I have
sir.
a short follow-up? Kasi mahalaga yung I think what Dean Marlo mentioned about, yung endowment of resources to the council, for it to be operationalized is important. One way of really doing it, and this is what we're pushing, to make watershed management plans as a framework for local and regional development, such that concerned national government agencies can channel their available resources to programs that are stated in the watershed management plan. So doon sa ating Watershed Management Council, if the NGAs are part of that, then they should be committed to funnel or to channel some of their development resources to programs that will support yung watershed management. In that way, hindi talaga problema maghanap ng fresh funding but it's just really a matter of the national government agencies focusing their investments on plans that are agreed upon for the watershed. So.
Okay, Sir Ansel.
yes, thank you. Actually, I lost connection. Sorry. So what I was saying a while ago is that I think the easiest way forward is, of course, to do it more locally, like what we are doing now with the provincial government and the municipalities, because most of these provinces and municipalities are now having their watershed or environment code where watershed management is practically part of their huge agenda. And therefore, in terms of basically mobilizing the council, they can easily do so. But part of the initiative now is to really come up with an agreement on how to really come up with some kind of locally sourced funding mechanism. PS mechanism is one, which I think we also did in Bago City. And the cost sharing mechanism is now a means to be able to showcase some kind of locally pooled contributions on watershed conservation. Again, this is in the absence of the national policies or laws that we have related to the mobilization of the council. But hopefully in the future, with the possible enactment of the executive order, we'll be able to really come up with a very institutionalized ways of mobilizing the council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you po for a very clear response. I hope na-satisfy po natin yung ating participants. Okay, for the next question from an anonymous participant. Question for Dr. Rex or Dean Marlo. What example of watershed management projects are converged with other government agencies projects like DSWDs and others, where people are engaged in to participate in those watershed management initiatives?
Muna siguro. Projects that I know, no, where there's really active engagement of different stakeholders. A very concrete example, alam to ni Dr. Rex, yung kay one of my admired mayors, Mayor Guillermo, doon sa Ilocos.
Yeah.
Saan nga ba sa Ilocos?
Pidig.
Yeah. Pidig. I encourage everyone to check on what he has been doing, and has a long track record of being to mobilize different stakeholders and being able to mobilize different funding sources. Like he's able to have innovative funding schemes for his health programs, for his watershed programs. He was able to get money from DA, DPWH, DNR, no? And well, that's a good example of what a very good visionary and a leader who knows how to implement things, no? Can be done. No? Sino pa ba? Marami mga LGUs. If you look at the Gawad Galing Pook list, you have very good examples. Pero some of these, when we look back at the list, a lot of them are very leader-centered. Kung nawala ng leader, hindi na-sustain. So I think the key here really is to put systems and procedures in place to institutionalize them. That it won't just depend on the leader. Pero having very good leaders to jumpstart a very good program is yan yung importante. Then sustaining it is another challenge. No? But that's where systems and procedures and yung principles of good governance should be put in place.
Okay.
Yeah. Judith, let me say something. But short
Yes,
lang.
sir.
Anong tawag dito? That's exactly the reason why we want stakeholder to participate. And again, as I said, when we did the master plan for Manila Bay, our intention was really to get everyone involved by all the national government agencies. You know why? Because at the end of the day, once we have completed the master plan, it will be them who should implement a lot of this together with the local government units. So yung master plan is not really looking for new funding. Yeah? It's not looking for new funding, but again, for reprioritizing yung mga budget that they already have, and make sure that they can align already to the master plan, and and for them to support yung mga programs that are in the master plan. And I think that's how it should be for all watershed management plans. Engage all the stakeholders, particularly NGAs and LGUs, and then have them the motivation to reprioritize, reallocate the resources in a way that is consistent with the programs that will need to be implemented in the watershed. So para hindi problema yung pera. Ang problema talaga dito, ang difficulty dito is in the beginning. How do you make sure that these national government agencies who will participate in developing the plan will actually commit no, will actually commit to provide the funding. Kasi diyan nagkamali, diyan nag-breakdown ng ang maraming integrated area development projects, no. Especially Bicol River Basin, because I'm familiar with that, no. It broke down kasi nung natapos na yung kanilang plano, nobody knows kung sino yung mag-initiate ng investment, no, to the particular programs, pero naandun lahat yung mga agencies, no, mga government agencies, and nobody want to, no one wants to take initiative in putting investments in the programs. But yun siguro yung mahalaga talaga in the beginning, magkalinawan kaagad, no. If the plan wants to do something or to implement programs, maliwanag na, ikaw agency to, kamo yan, no. Related yan sa'yo, no? Dapat you should be able to reshape your priorities in this area. So,
Okay, sir. For our next question, this comes from Sir Forester Celso P. Diaz. Question for Dr. Rex and Sir Ansel. At the score of 1 to 5, in your observation, as to what extent the different stakeholders have participated in the management of watershed in order to enhance and maintain its ecosystem services in the case of watershed supporting Manila Bay area? That's
Ansel, do you want to go first, or I can go first?
I cannot speak for
Manila
the
Bay,
Manila
kasi
Bay
Manila
area.
Bay ito, no? Okay, so let me take that question, gauging from the stakeholder engagement activities that we did, and I think we invested so much and a lot, and I don't know whether that's enough investment that we made to encourage the participants to participate, but I thought we did enough. But nonetheless, whether just based on that, if I base the participation of stakeholders on that, I can say it's really a high number, no. Siguro between 4 or 5, or 3 to 5. But again, it's a different thing. It's a different thing, if you start from planning, another issue, the implementation of that will be another issue, altogether. Okay, and I'm not saying that that is impossible to do from the planning stage, to ensure that implementation will come naturally, no, after completing the plan. But that is the reality, no? Lalo na pag pinag-usapan natin ang Pilipinas, no? A lot of the decisions in terms of local investments are actually dependent on political leadership, and we know how tenuous that that leadership is. That change almost every 3 years. So yun yung problema dito. But nonetheless, basing on their participation doon sa planning process, and talagang passionate yung mga yan, in many instances, I would rate that participation really, really high.
Yeah. So I'll not speak for the Manila Bay, of course. I'll be speaking about for the Watershed Management Council that we organized. So for Nueva Vizcaya, for example, I didn't find the difficulty of really mobilizing the council because, one, maybe they already have this high awareness in watershed conservation, knowing that Nueva Vizcaya is called the watershed haven of the Philippines because of most of the headwaters of Cagayan River Basin are in Nueva Vizcaya. So they are fully aware about the importance of participating in watershed governance and management. So it's not very difficult to really invite and mobilize stakeholders to support the process. The same is true with Ifugao, where we organized the council. So what we did is just to discuss it with the governor and the vice governor and consult the stakeholders, and we were able to really easily organize the council. And I think we didn't find any problem in coming up with the executive order on that. So again, operation or implementation of the management plan is another thing. I agree with Dr. Rex, but what we are doing now is to somehow recognize for each LGU and partner stakeholders, somehow recognize the importance of specific contribution that they be able to do for watershed conservation, which I think based on the support that we are getting now in operationalization of the cost sharing mechanism, most of the stakeholders, especially the LGUs, are willing to provide allocation on an annual basis in implementing small or medium-scale watershed conservation in their locality. So I think it's the bottom line is how we make them aware of the importance and how we really came up with a good lobbying in terms of the funding allocation moving forward.
Okay, thank you, sirs, for that very informative response. Okay, a question from Antonio Alcantara. Dr. Rex has formulated the guidelines for a functional, collaborative, multi-sectoral, community-based watershed management. How can we make this work in Los Baños to be a model for LGU, Academ, local water district, LLDA, upland farmers, fisher folks, DNR, and others to work harmoniously to minimize the effects of project future water scarcity and promote biodiversity protection?
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc Aja, for the question. Dean Marlo is here. He is with me in a watershed policy advocacy project that has just been funded by DOSTP card. And we're taking off in November. And Los Baños is one of the is one of our pilot sites. No? The other one is in San Gabriel, La Union, no, for the Barubob watershed. So yes, Doc Aja, I think we will be partnering with you. Meron na kaming initial communication with Mayor, and we will be doing this for Los Baños, no? For the Mulawin at saka Dampalit watershed. Yeah. So yeah, we will discuss it, Doc Aja, no? Rest assured that this is part of the project. Yeah. Thank you.
If I may add lang a little, yung project that we'll be doing through Dr. Rex, I think very important component talaga doon yung monitoring.
Yeah.
We should have a monitoring and reporting system that has to be transparently communicated, well communicated and transparently communicated. Then we have to have clear, very clear lines of accountability, responsibility and accountability. Because if you don't have scientific data, it's very difficult to pinpoint who really is responsible. Right? Why are we having such problems in a watershed? We have to be able to pinpoint. No? Is it the industry, or do we have a policy gap? Or so all of this will be captured very well if we have a very good scientific monitoring system. But it has to be linked with monitoring and reporting and accountability.
Yeah.
So through very transparent reporting. Doon tayo mahina eh.
Agree.
People die, structures, infrastructures really are damaged. But at the end of the day, you can't even pinpoint a single person. Diba? Siguro, Sir Rex, maganda yung gagawin natin dito.
Yeah,
we have to really have very clear accountability.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know if it's also possible to make it performance-based.
It has to.
Accountability.
Accountability is very much very much linked sa performance metrics ng individual.
Right.
Okay, so mukhang may future po talaga itong pinag-uusapan na ito. Malapit na sa reality. Okay, for our next question from Forester Jem Castillo, a question for Sir Ansel. I was wondering if the FMP had any participation in the development of the flood risk management master plan for the Halaur River Basin, which was funded by ADB. That was completed last year. Did the master plan include inputs from the project? That's it, sir.
Unfortunately, we're not part of the master planning for Halaur. The only participation we have now is in the strengthening of the council, because the council there has been organized since 2000. So, yeah.
Okay.
We will I hope to discuss that issue no pagdating natin sa watershed planning because you know
Yeah.
I think we're missing something pa rin no pagdating sa
Right.
yung a lot of the
Yeah.
projects no, and flood risk assessment is essentially should be part of larger watershed management planning. It cannot be done separately. So but anyway, we'll discuss that for later. But surprising to hear that, Ansel.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
we are looking forward for that on our next webinar. That would be on November 3. Okay, for our next question from Forester Dolom of USAID Safe Water Project. Any of our speakers can answer this. What is your view on the current practice of having the governor or RED as the chief of WMCs? A province may have many watersheds and we don't expect the governor to attend all the meetings. In Negros Occidental, for instance, the PLGU has identified the watersheds as critical sources for their water requirements. The emerging recommendation now is to have one provincial water security council headed by the governor with the individual WMC as the members to be chaired by the LGU, having the biggest area in the watershed, and the DNR Senro as the co-chair. Again, the question is, what is your view on the current practice of having the governor or RED as the chair of WMCs?
Oh, maybe I can speak first. Yes, there's a difficulty of course, the governor attending the meeting, considering that he also attended a lot of concerns of the province. But mostly, the current practice now is that it's being delegated to the more institutional person within the province, for example, the MPDC or the ENRO, to really head or spearhead or preside the council's meeting. So it's what we did in Vizcaya, for example. It's not the RED who co-chair the council, but the PENRO, so he can easily be accessible. But nonetheless, if the PENRO is not available, then at least the second in line or a certain CENRO can also be designated. Yes, difficult, but for governors who are highly supportive of the cause, for Nueva Vizcaya, for example, the governor is always present during the meeting, and in Ifugao, for example. So we didn't find it really difficult to lead them the council meeting. I don't know for other experiences that we have in other regions.
I also may add, no? Ako, I think mga governors, mga offices nila, they're best sa steering function. They should provide the steering function, but somebody has to do the level ng TWG or executive committee level. And not even the executive committee or the TWG will be doing operational implementation. There should really be an organization doing the operational aspect, no? And then you'll have an oversight over them. But at the top, kung governor is really interested, steering lang siya. But he may designate. Better if he can designate somebody. No? Pero steering function lang. We cannot expect the governor to perform both the executive at saka sa operations level. Minsan naghahalo-halo yung trabaho sa council. We expect the council members to do all functions, which I think should not be the case. There's a mix of functions.
Yeah. All right. Dun sa question, I don't have any problem, with LGUs, with governors and mayors playing a very prominent part, whether it's a steering part, or a coordinating part of it. And then yung issue lang dito na ni-raise ko kanina is that very volatile yan, every 3 years napapalit yan, or it can actually change every 3 years. Pero this is where yung sinabi kanina ni Dean Marlo, where we can use science, where we can use science to make sure that there is a permanent commitment, there's a permanent commitment to the indicators of good watershed management, Pag may commitment doon at saka may accountability, then anyone who sits there, no, should be run after, no. And dito natin palalabasin ngayon na if we have a good accounting and monitoring system in a watershed, no, let's use that as a tool, no. Tool siya no. But at the same time also, no, kung ang governor or mayor is just at the steering and then mayroon kang technical working group, that's fine. Pero yung technical working group should work closely also to make sure na yung watershed management activities and programs are basically the same programs that the local government units will need, no? Kinakailangan yun. And if that is so, no, kung ganun yung watershed management plans, yung ganun ang agenda ng watershed management, I don't think there is any LGU executive who will actually go against that. No. Palagay ko kapag nakita niya yung that the watershed management programs are the programs that he needs in his municipality or province. So yun lang.
Okay, thank you for your views. We would like to call our participant, Sir Forester Dexter Cabahog, for a live question. Raymond, please. Sir Dexter? Okay, maybe later. Let's have another question.
Okay na, ito na po.
Okay, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Regards to the resource speaker, ASEC Amaro, Marlo, and Chancellor Rex, and also Forester Cabrera. This is really an actual question that I observed here in Mendoza.
Dex, pwedeng Brad, pwedeng pakilakasan.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
Yung senior
Hindi
ears
ka
ko kasi
naririnig.
medyo yung senior ears ko kasi medyo hindi na matalas kagaya ng dati.
Rinig nyo na ako?
Yeah, well,
rinig na
Medyo
po?
mahina
yan.
lang po.
Okay.
Okay, sige.
Okay.
Naka-headphone kasi ako yan, tinututok ko na yung Okay. Itong katanungan ko ay batay sa aking karanasan dito sa Lanosa Watershed. Nagkataon na tinutulungan namin ng LGU Lanosa to come up their watershed plan. But ang kanilang kasing scope of work ay hanggang water characterization lang, watershed characterization lang at saka vulnerability assessment. Ang aming problema ngayon ay yung planning sa drafting ang integrated watershed management plan. Among the stakeholder, tila yata ang buong Lanusa ay sakop ng CADT. So in CIP yan. Tapos naman, ang LGU, mayroon na silang expiring na Forestland use plan at ginagawang si LUP plan ngayon. Pero sa kakulangan siguro ng technical capability, hindi talaga nila naangkop yung watershed characterization. So ang DENR ang aming naasahan. Kasi ayon kay Forester Cabrera, mandato talaga ng DENR yung pag-assista o paggawa ng yung watershed management plan. So ang aming katanungan, pagkatapos namin magawa ng water characterization, nakabitin tila ang hindi namin malaman kung sino ang gagawa ng tututok sa LGU para maano nila yung plano nila at ma-implementing mechanism para ma-implement nila ito. Sa inyong karanasan, Chancellor Rex, saka si Dean Marlo at si Forester Cabrera, paano ba natin matulungan ang LGU batay sa mga mandate ng mga ahensya natin at batay rin sa ating karanasan? Para naman hindi naman mangyari lang puro science-based data lang, wala namang plano at hindi rin ma-implement ito. Paano ba natin sila matulungan? Salamat po. Nakuha niyo po ang katanungan ko po?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, kasama ako dyan sa project na yun.
Sige. Sige po. Sige. Oo nga po.
And it's really our problem, no? Pero now na ni-raise mo uli yung question na yan, Dex, ano? I think, yung pagdating sa watershed management plan, CENRO should be able to help. No? CENRO should be able to help kasi yan naman ay isa sa mga priorities talaga ng mga CENROs ngayon, no? So we will discuss this with CENRO, no? And see at what point the LGU and Lanusa at saka sila can work together to develop yung watershed management plans that are encompassing yung kanilang yung kanilang municipality. Ang laki kasi ng ano eh, laki kasi ng sakop ng Lanusa eh, no? Sakop nila ay 6 na watersheds, no? So malaki talaga yung problema nila, you know. But yeah. But I think Senro should be able to help them.
Sige, thank you, Chanchi.
Yeah.
Kahapon po, nagkausap kami ni Red Noni at in-involve natin sila para kasi at sabi natin, ito naman ating ginagawa ay sila naman talaga mapakinabangan nila later on. And he committed to represent yung watershed division niya sa region at saka maybe some instruction from Pinro to represent during our deliberation sa kapag ng issues ang concern. Ang akin lang siguro, although pag-usapan natin ito, pero gusto sana natin makuha rin ang opinion ng kasamahan ninyo kasi yung ating pag-usapan pa naman natin ay follow-up ito sa ating project. Makakuha lang tayo ng kuro-kuro rin ni Dean Marlon o ni Forester Cabrera. Mayroon bang talagang example, best practice na ang LGU talagang, sa bagay na may nasasabi na kayo, yung sa Ilocos, ay talagang ang LGU ang nangunguna talaga champion in spite of lack of technical expertise and resources to do this. Wala bang talagang ibang champion na umaalalay sa kanila para may isa katuparan nila yung kanilang vision sa management planning na watershed nila?
They cannot do it by themselves. That's the reality.
Yeah, I think that's also my thought that yes, the LGU can lead, can steer the way, but and can spearhead the advocacy on watershed conservation. But in terms of the requirement of management planning, I think most of these LGUs has the difficulty. They don't have enough expertise to do it. But if they are really willing, they will tap those experts to be able to help them.
Yeah.
I think that's the trajectory that we are promoting now, no? Because expertise will not readily be available in most of these LGUs. DENR, of course, is the primary mandated institution to provide the technical assistance, and hopefully some of the academic institutions can also help.
Din Marlon, hindi ba maigi rin na dapat ang regional office ng DENR through Red Tama Noni mag-spearhead para magamit niya yung scientific data na binibaseline namin for also initiate, although may co-management naman sila sa FLOP nila, hindi ba maaari natin silang hikayatin na tulungan itong LGU sa pagpursige ng kanilang planning and also integrated watershed management plan at tutulong paano i-implementa ito? Paano ba mechanism? Sa iyong karanasan bilang YOSIC din ng DENR noon.
Dean?
YOSIC?
Actually, I'm having problems yung hindi ko masyado maintindihan. Sorry. Forester Dex. Mahina yung I cannot understand very clearly. Paki-summarize nga. Sa akin ba nakatanong?
Opo, makiulit po ako. Nakikita ko kasi mandato to ng DENR. Okay?
Yeah.
Maaari ba nating masabi na dapat ang regional offices o regional DENR ang magpupunyagi, maging champion para maisakatuparan itong watershed management plan ng LGU? Paano natin gawing mechanism, anong mekanismo dapat nito?
Well, tingin ko kung ang policy nag-emanate din sa DENR, sa policy making process natin, di ba, kasama din naman talaga how to implement the policy. I think along that line, dapat very clear din. So DENR can really plays a very important role kasi sa kanya nanggaling yung policy. And in implementing that policy, in this context natin, napakadaming stakeholders. So yeah, DENR can from a regulatory point of view, yes, di ba? Napakalaki ng yan kasi DENR can sa kanya yung policy, siya rin yung regulator. It can put pressure. If we talk of a particular resource, say water quality, andyan ang EMB. So EMB can put pressure actually doon sa LGU. Pero ang maganda, it's not just pressuring the LGU how to be threatening the LGU na certain sanctions. Kung mas developmental lang ang approach, you discuss about the monitoring result. Ito yung result ng water quality test, then you discuss. DNR can discuss also with the LGU ano yung steps, ano ways to be able to address the problem. Kasi kung regulatory lang na ang LGU may limitation din, it won't work. We've seen that's why we have a lot of degraded resources. Minsan ang nagiging perspective natin is only regulatory. But how to help the LGU comply? DNR can provide the science, and DNR can also work with the other state universities to bring in the science. And ang LGU naman is pwedeng regulator din siya, right? So pag na-identify naman ng LGU, sino sa kanya ang nagpo-pollute, di ba balikan niya yung industry? So it's both the DNR, EMB running after the industry, and also the EMB can also, the LGU can also run after the industry. So I think ito yung mga dapat pinag-uusapan na you don't just leave the policy and then expect the LGU to be able to implement it. Kasi in implementing a policy, it requires more than writing the guidelines, diba? Or writing down the policy. Yung mechanism how to implement it, where to get the funding, where to get the technical expertise. Ito yung mga kailangan natin to get a policy implemented. Minsan naiiwan lang talaga tayo. We just we're left with the policy, yun lang. Pero yung mechanism how to implement it, get things done, measure it, and make sure that from a longitudinal point of view, na-achieve mo yung policy goals mo, hindi nangyayari sa atin kasi tumitigil na tayo doon sa writing of the policy.
Okay.
Salamat po. Salamat.
Okay, thank you.
Next,
Bye, brother.
sabihin natin sa LGU, wait for next year, magkikik in na yung Mandanas, marami silang pera.
Sige po.
Mandanas rolling.
Sige po, salamat.
Okay,
26% additional.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Dexter. Hope na liwanagan po kayo from our speakers. Okay, so we'll go back to the questions po from our participants. Okay, a question from Sir David John Morandarte for Sir Ansel Cabrera. Implementation of Forestland Management Project will end next year. Based on your opinion, in the long run, how can we make sure that Forestland Management Project will sustain the growth and development of our partner POs and other stakeholders, making sure that they will continue what we have started? That's it, sir.
Okay, so that's specifically for the POs, not for the Watershed Management Council. Okay, we have what we call the Sustainability Action Plan that will be developing for the project. Will be implementing for the project. Actually, it has been completed. So part of the overall sustainability mechanism that will be installing with the people's organization is to strengthen their overall capacity for enterprise development, because based on past or previous experiences in most of the CBFM that we support, ang isang malaking gaps talaga to sustain the initiative on CBFM is the funding. So if the people's organization doesn't have enough fund to be able to support the operation of each people's organization as well as implement some of the development activities of the organization, then most of the time, nagiging inactive ang members at nawawala na yung buong people's organization. So in this case, what we are doing now in the project is to strengthen their capability to implement some kind of enterprises or livelihood for each of the individual members of the organization. So we also support the formation or formulation of what we call the agroforestry value chain, because we have supported a lot in terms of the agroforestry development in the CBFM areas. And part of this initiative is to consolidate now those that are harvesting their agroforestry and provide technology as well as training to be able to improve the overall products that will be delivering to the market. So that's one. And also part of that consolidation is also to link them to the key institutions that we have, the DTI, the DOST, to provide the technology as well as the funding support and some of the facilities to be able to successfully implement the enterprises. So yun yung nakikita naming main sustainability mechanism of the project, aside from the continuous capacity building that we are still doing.
Judith, pwedeng dagdagan ko yung sinabi ni Ansel, additional examples, no? Meron
Yes, sir.
meron kaming nung kailan ba natapos yung 2011 pa natapos na yung project namin, Conservation Farming Village Project, no? It's an upland development project. And it was a project that we did also with local government units, no? Two of our sites, yung Ligao City at saka yung La Libertad Negros Oriental, no? They are the good ones na nagawa namin na-achieve namin yung gusto namin mangyari, which is sustainability. You know, what happened was that when we were doing the project, you know, we were able to explain very clearly to these two LGUs, you know, that their communities actually in the uplands are in need of help. You know, and once they have appreciated that, and once they understood yung concept ng project, you know, they fully embraced that. And you know what? Up to now, they are pouring in budget to that, no? They are, La Libertad is actually allocating 1 million pesos per year just to sustain the program. No, not necessarily to supply yung needs ng mga farmers, no, to keep supplying their needs, but basically to provide the enabling environment for continuous capacity building, for easy access to market, you know, and for continuous spread, no, of the technology to other upland communities. They're even helping the nearby LGUs already, you know, in their own upland barangays. So ito yung mahalaga, no, for any project, you know, in watershed, no. In watershed, we need to really make it very clear doon sa mga LGUs, you know, ano ba ito, what's in for them, you know, why this is important to them, how good is the project to them, no. Once they fully appreciate that, no, sila na mismo yung magtutuloy ng project na yan, no. Ligao City has actually employed, you know, permanent 4 new technical assistants, no, just to help yung upland barangays nila in this program. So sa kanila na yung program, hindi na sa amin yon, but they're still continuing that.
Yeah,
Okay.
quick note on that. Quick note on the LGU support. No, we are now also in the process of presenting all the plans of the POs to our partner LGUs through the council, and hopefully with that they'll be able to come up with an agreement on how to support the implementation of their community-based forest management plans. So yun yung mga isang tinitingnan din namin na part ng sustainability mechanism ng project.
Okay, thank you, sirs. Thank you also to our participants. As much as we wanted to entertain all of your questions, we are bounded by time and we don't. Yes, sir.
Sayang naman yung ano. I would also want to take off yung continuing discussion during the alumni homecoming ng College of Forestry. Si Secretary Matu really di ba? How would I say this? Yung very clear yung kanyang direction na there's such a thing as a production zone and a protection zone. So I think we have to take advantage. When we say production zone, dapat iwasan natin yung nagkakaroon ng moratorium ng logging or log ban or preventing di ba, harvesting. Kasi the fact that it's a designated production zone, yung lahat ng incentives should be given. And I think I'd like that, no, yung ni Secretary. So let's take advantage of that. And but unfortunately, there are also certain areas na dinesignate natin na production zone, pero meron tayong moratorium. So if we'll use the case ng ginawa ng New York City, if it's a designated production zone, but in the future, nakita mo na it will pose a threat, the investor has to be compensated or the landowner has to be compensated. Kasi if we do not do that, we'll send the wrong signal sa small farmer pati sa big investor, di ba? And I think these are very simple policy mga policy na policies, no, that really acts as a disincentive, and we have to really be very, very cautious, no. pagdating sa ganyan. In fact, the government doesn't need to spend billions of pesos for greening programs if we just have the right policy climate. Let the private sector do it.
Yeah.
Kaya magandang magandang yung take off yung sinasabi ni SEC na I think that's where we should really work together, mapping out these production zones, and then in these production zones, ano ba talaga yung kailangan ng Pilipinas, no? And then throughout the Philippines, let's map that out and make sure na pag sinabi natin production zone niya, ay we won't impose any moratorium unless na lang kung necessary, we have to compensate the investor or the landowner. Yan lang, no? Like
Din,
Okay.
hopefully yung determination ng production areas, no, watershed based din ang gagamitin nilang approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
You should follow the same framework.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, sorry po for interrupting you all, but I know you're still very, very eager to answer all the questions, but we don't want to hold you that long. So maybe call on our speakers for some words of wisdom before the closing ceremonies. Doc Rex?
Oh.
For words of wisdom, sir.
Hindi ko alam kung may wisdom ako, but anyway. No. I just want to say, that this webinar series is really very important. I think we're touching on very critical issues, and really hoping that this webinar series will help us, improve the way we manage our watersheds. And I don't see any reason why, after hearing all these presentations ng mga speakers, excluding me, I think good things are bound to happen. So thank you everyone for supporting this webinar series, to all the participants, and most especially, of course, to DNR, for hosting this and partnering with the Forestry Development Center.
Dean?
Papasalamat din ako, and also in behalf of the college na we're part of this webinar series. It's really not only very informative, but hopefully it will be a call also to action. We have the science already. It's there, no? Pero baka minsan nagiging paralysis, action. We tend to overanalyze things.
Yeah.
And then action paralysis naman din tayo, no? So sana we'll be able to put into good use and actual use, no? And operationalize what we've learned here. So maraming salamat sa participation ng bawat isa.
Thank you, sir. Sir Ansel?
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me here. Although alam ko kasama kami talaga dapat dito because this is also part of our mandate. But ganito siguro, there is really a high hope in terms of mobilizing stakeholders. I can see that there are a lot of windows of opportunity for engaging them in watershed conservation. We know for a fact that the DNR alone cannot do this, and practically with the current way that the fragmentation of all these mandates is not. We really need to really organize this in such a manner that will come up with an integrated approach in watershed management. So, yun nga, malaki ang pag-asa kasi nakikita ko nga maraming windows of opportunities. So, hopefully all the stakeholders will continuously be invited and enjoined to be able to make things happen for watershed management in the Philippines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. And again, thank you to our participants and to our speakers. I'm giving back the floor to my colleague, Raymond.
Thank you, Ma'am Judith. So let me just ask our speakers to keep their cameras on. So again, let me, in behalf of our participants, let me thank our speakers for really sharing valuable knowledge. Saka makikita nyo naman po sa pagsagot ng mga questions nyo, napaka-passionate po nila towards watershed management or sustainable watershed management. Okay, so currently po, pasalamat din po kami sa mga viewers namin. Currently, we have more than 400 participants via Zoom and more than 100 via Facebook. Okay, so for the awarding of certificates, let me just read the citation. Okay, so the Forestry Development Center and Forestland Management Bureau hereby presents this certificate of appreciation to the following: Rex Victor Cruz, Marlo Mendoza, and Anselmo Cabrera for serving as speaker in the policy forum enhancing and sustaining stakeholders' participation in watershed management, held this 13th of October 2021, organized by the Forestry Development Center through the UPLB Foundation, Incorporated, and in partnership with the Forest Management Bureau for the implementation of the Save Our Watershed campaign, with support from the Information Technology Center, UPLB, via Zoom webinar. Given this 13th day of October 2021, signed Marcial C. Amaro Jr., SO3, Marlo Mendoza, Dean, College of Forestry and Natural Resources, and Priscila Dolom, Director. So, kung nandito pa po si ASEC, Amaro, and Ma'am Presi Dolom, kindly turn on your cameras. So, pa-picture lang po tayo sa ating mga speakers. Yan, a photo op. Documenter. Ayan, pinakita ni Sir yung kanyang certificate. Sir Marlo din. So, si
Sorry,
Sir,
wala
baka,
rin sa akin.
Sir
Nasa
Ansel,
office.
baka ano,
Nasa
naiwan
office.
sa office. Okay. So,
Sorry.
nasa bahay pala si Sir Ansel.
Thank you,
Ayan.
thank you.
Okay. So, okay na po ba yung ating photo, yung documentation natin? I think okay na. Okay. So, thank you very much. So, to formally close this webinar, I would like to call our distinguished director, Dr. Priscila Dolom, to give us the closing remarks.
Thank you, Raymond. Time check po. Good afternoon sa inyong lahat. Magandang hapon po, lalo na sa ating Associate Dean, Dr. Analyn Codilan, DNR ASEC and concurrent Director of Forest Management Bureau, Forester Ansel Cabrera. Sa ating pong magigiting na mga speakers, Dr. Rex Victor Cruz, Prof. Marlo Mendoza, and Forester Anselmo Cabrera. Thank you very much po for sharing with us your time, knowledge, and experiences on enhancing and sustaining stakeholders' participation in watershed management. To our online participants po via Zoom na halos 420 and FB Live na 127 po, who continuously support and actively participating to our webinars. Namely po, ito po mga ating DNR officials and staff sa FMB, EMB, BMB, MGB, and WRB, and other government agencies po like DOST, DA, LLDA. The non-government agencies, local government units po, people's organizations, private sector individuals, the Society of Filipino Foresters, academic institutions po, yung schools, colleges, and universities, the Philippine Forestry Education Network, faculty, staff, and students, the UPLB, Philippine Forestry Education po, then UPLB faculty, reps, and students. Magandang tanghali po sa inyong lahat. Today's forest policy ETalks starts the role of key stakeholders in enhancing and sustaining their participation in sustainable watershed management. As a review po, in our last 3 policy ETalks on watershed management, we discussed the status of our watershed, the policies and programs, and sustainable watershed management. Based on our discussions, our watershed have multiple functions and services, and multiple ecosystem services, and with multiple stakeholders that affect the management of our watershed. These stakeholders have different mandates and interests in the management of our watershed. As Dr. Rex Cruz said, there is a need to identify the key stakeholders and know their importance as well as their good practices in watershed management. The management of our watershed is more of a landscape approach or ridge-to-reef approach, which covers different ecosystem services, ecosystems, and multi-stakeholders like government agencies, non-government agencies, POs, private sectors, individuals, entities, LGUs, environmental groups, and other stakeholders or interest groups. In our previous discussions, we were able to identify the different ecosystems. Mga nakaraan po. Sabi natin, we had the coastal, urban, upland, and forest ecosystem along our watershed, as well as the different stakeholders responsible for its ecosystem. The common interests of these stakeholders are both for conservation, protection, and production of our watershed. To address the sustainable watershed management, the preparation of the integrated watershed management plan is necessary, which is interconnected and in harmony with other plans. Based on our discussion this morning, the role of the stakeholders are very important in the implementation of the integrated watershed management plan. The stakeholders have to be formalized, institutionalized through the formation of a watershed management council or a watershed management body. Considering the current status of our watersheds, the formation of watershed management council or watershed management body is urgently needed. Sabi nga kanina nila din Marlo, kailangan should be based on principles of governance. Dapat transparent, accountable, and with participation. But at present, wala po tayong policy on institutionalization or formalization of WMC throughout the country. But despite kahit wala po tayong policy, there are WMCs that has been created. Gaya po na isinare sa atin ni Forester Ansel Cabrera, he shared to us the formation of WMC ng FMP projects dun po sa kanilang 24 sub-watersheds and in 5 provinces. According to him, they were successful in the formation of a WMC na they follow the process and the organizational structure has been recommended. So kahit po wala tayong policy, there are WMCs that has been formed throughout the country. And according to the DENR daw po, of the 132 watersheds that we have, 15 have integrated watershed management plans. And according to the DENR also, there is already a draft DENR memorandum circular on the creation of Watershed Management Council. And according to Forester Cabrera, there is also an EO on sustainable watershed management. But based on our discussion this morning, I think dapat po sana itong mga policies na ito makonsider yung mga issues and challenges presented by Prof. Marlo Mendoza, makonsider po sana in the formation of a WMC, the proposed organizational structure as experienced by Forester Cabrera and Prof. Marlo Mendoza from other countries. Tapos po yung mga recommendations ni Dr. Cruz on the engagement of the different key stakeholders. So I think at present po kasi, the creation of WMC is optional. Since there is no overall management committee at the national level. Hence, existing WMCs are confined to specific watersheds. Moreover, the government has limited resources to finance Watershed Management Council. So I think everybody will agree kung sasabihin ko po na we are on the way forward, ito pong ating policy forum, dapat po magkaroon tayo ng isang proposed policy regarding the creation of the Watershed Management Council or the EO on Sustainable Watershed Management Council, in which we consider all the issues raised here, all the recommendations raised during this forum, para po talaga magkaroon tayo ng isang magandang policy regarding on sustainable watershed management. In closing, on behalf of the Forestry Development Center staff, we would like to thank our partners, the Forestland Management Project of FMB-DENR, the UPLB Information Technology Center, kay Roy Hicalo, and lastly, I would like to congratulate the FDC staff for a great job and in sustaining this forest policy ETalks. Thank you and congratulations. On that note, I would like to end this message. Thank you and good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Dolom,
you,
for
thank
that.
you, thank
visit.
you.
Sir Rex,
Thank
Sir
you.
Marlo, Sir Ansel. Yes. So before we formally end this webinar, some announcement from us. So again, let me read this. For those of you who want to engage us to attend future events, please follow us on the social media accounts. Okay, for Facebook, we have UPLB Forestry Development Center. That's on our own FB page. You can also follow the Forest Management Bureau, DNR, and Forestland Management Project para po sa mga watershed campaign nila. And also the Save Our Watershed campaign Facebook page. For YouTubers, you can follow our YouTube page, UPLB Forestry Development Center. Hit the bell button to subscribe and follow us. And then for the last webinar, which will be scheduled on November 3, the topic will be science-based watershed management planning. So this will be the last of the series of webinars for watershed management. So for those asking, we have already posted the post-evaluation form link sa chat. Also, you can scan this QR code para ma-redirect po kayo sa aming evaluation form link. Or you can go directly, or you can type the URL here, https://bit.ly/eval/fbc-etalk7. So, ma-redirect po kayo dyan. So, please take note that the evaluation link will be valid only until 12 noon of October 20, 2021. So, again, in behalf of our speakers, in behalf of everyone at the FBC, we would like to thank our participants for attending this webinar. So, we hope to see you again for the last series. And thank you for giving time in attending this webinar. So have a great day and thank you everyone. See you next webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Doc Rex.
Bye-bye,
Marlo.
everyone.
Ansel.